if everyone just stopped and counted the actual number of people you see speaking about and things, it could be in the 30s, right? And there's 435 of us. Most of us are not on cable news.
Welcome to Canusa Street, a podcast at the intersection of the issues and policies between Canada and the United States. Here are your hosts, Scotty Greenwood and Chris Sands.
Welcome back to Canusa Street, everybody. I'm Scotty Greenwood with the Canadian American Business Council, joined by the one and only Christopher Sands at Woodrow Wilson. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
I'm great, Scotty. Nice to be back on Canusa Street with you.
It's great to be back with you, and I'm very excited about our esteemed guest. Congressman Rick Larsen has been active, I think, with both of our organizations. The Canadian American Business Council had a congressional roundtable with the congressman recently. It was so illuminating, we had to bring him back to the podcast. But it's fun because he's from Washington. We're from Washington, D.C. He commutes back and forth to Washington State, so that's a hell of a commute. But I'm excited to talk to the congressman about everything he's working on, everything we care about. And before we turn it over to that, why don't you introduce him properly, Chris?
Oh, sure. Well, I feel like I'm welcoming him to our neighborhood. Representative Rick Larsen is the congressman for Western Washington University, where I taught for a while. And so I used to run into him in a very much more casual setting than Canusa Street in the podcast. But he's a legend in Washington State. He represents Washington State's 2nd Congressional District, which he likes to say, and I've heard him say it, is north of Seattle, but includes none of Seattle. The 2nd District includes a portion of Snohomish County along the I-5 corridor, as well as all of Whatcom, Skagit, Island, and San Juan counties. He recently became the lead Democrat, or as we say, ranking member, on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where he is focused on making bold long-term investments in the whole nation's infrastructure to create jobs, drive economic growth, and to build a cleaner, greener, safer, and more accessible transportation network.
This Congress needs to get to work on a long-term transportation bill that doesn't just patch our aging roads, but invest in an infrastructure that meets the needs of America's 21st century economy.
He's a member of the New Democrat Coalition and a strong advocate for pro-growth policies that support innovation, job creation, and a strong economic foundation. Now, here's the tricky bit. This is in my script, but I have to make sure I get this right. He wishes Canada the best of luck in group play in the upcoming Women's FIFA World Cup, but he knows where his loyalties are. You will find him rooting for Team USA all the way. So a perfect start to a Canusa Street visit. Welcome, Congressman.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate that so much. And I definitely will be rooting for Team USA, U.S. Women's National Team. But I know Canada's good, and I'm not going to. Canada is a very, very good team.
Well, you're a bit of an expert, Congressman. I mean, you played soccer. I don't know how long in your childhood you played, but then, do I know this right? You were a ball boy for the Seattle Sounders. Is that a true story?
It is a true story. I forget who they're playing, but this is the old North American Soccer League, the NASL. And when the Sounders joined MLS, of course, the Vancouver Whitecaps were still there and are still there. The Portland Timber are still there. So the Cascadia rivalry is still very strong up here in the Northwest.
Oh my gosh. Well, so just sticking with soccer for a second, how excited are you about the World Cup coming to North America?
First off, I'm very excited for the U.S. Women's National Team playing in the World Cup in Australia and New Zealand next with them. And then in 2026, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico are the co-hosts for Men's World Cup. Very excited. And one of the issues that we're trying to get some attention on is the idea that you could, since Vancouver and Seattle are both host cities hosting games, like FIFA and U.S. Soccer and the U.S. and Canadian governments to be thinking about how best to both get games scheduled back-to-back in Seattle and Vancouver so that fans can just take the train from Seattle to Vancouver and back again, just see a game every other day and stay here in the Pacific Northwest or the Canadian Pacific, just going back and forth and seeing some of the best international soccer played. And it's a border issue. It's a transportation issue. So there's a lot of information that has to take place to make that happen.
You know what? It's also an immigration issue because Chris and I were both in Mexico City at something called the North Capitol Forum last fall. We're gonna and Canusa Street. We had a few podcasts recorded down there. We're going to go back this fall. And one of the issues that was raised, Congressman, with the leaders from all three countries is, is there a way to look at particularly U.S. immigration, but immigration in all three countries, so it makes it easier for the fans to get back and forth, Mexico, U.S., and Canada? And, the answer I've gotten from Homeland Security is like, good luck. Hell no, we're not going to soften, waive, make exemptions. Like, it's going to be an issue. But I wonder if you're hearing that kind of stuff.
It will be a disaster if Homeland Security continues to take that stance. Rather than trying to find a way to facilitate travel in this regard, because you're going to have folks on tourist visas, I presume will be coming to the U.S. or coming into Vancouver. Yeah,
I'm being a little harsh because there is a working group, and hopefully they're making progress. I'll turn it to Chris in a second, but my experience on this is with the Vancouver Olympics and the Salt Lake Olympics and the Atlanta Olympics, where it was about getting athletes from all around the world. So the fan base, I think, is much larger for FIFA.
And the challenge, we're going to have folks from all over the world, but just think of the, Europeans who have the Schengen system, where they're just quite used to getting on a train and going to the next country. That doesn't exist here and on the North American continent. So you're going to have fans, I think, coming with a high expectation of travel. And certainly within the U.S., it won't be a problem. But if they want to go see their team in Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver, or they want to go to Mexico City, it's going to be a real challenge. It's one that I think the U.S. and Canada and Mexico really need to tackle because it's going to look rough for the U.S. There will be problems. It's a matter of if there are going to be big problems or solvable problems, especially when the world is coming. The world, it is the largest sport in the world. The world is coming to North America to watch the beautiful game. I hope they have a beautiful time.
Congressman, I think, and you could correct me here, I could have a faulty memory, but I think back when when Vancouver hosted the Winter Olympics in 2010, I heard you, as part of a Pacific Northwest Economic Region sponsored dialogue, talking about the two-nation vacation and getting U.S. and Canada to issue visas for our partners in Asia and in Europe and in Latin America to come and participate in the games, so they could really just coordinate the visa applications so that it made it easy for people to come. And once they came to North America, not just see Vancouver, but see Seattle, see San Francisco, any place they want to go. Do you think there's any chance of reviving that kind of coordination for this big event coming up?
Well, there are models that the U.S. has already participated in. Of course, the Vancouver Olympics is one. The other model will be the APEC Business Travel Card, which I was at this age now, I'm the grandfather of that. I'm supposed to father the APEC Business Travel Card. But, we got that passed, made into law. Has been a success. So there are models that we can use that are multinational models as well as just binational models that hopefully, we're pointing these out to the White House. We're encouraging U.S. soccer as well to engage on this, and they're aware of it. But literally, the ideal, maybe to your listeners, we're talking about soccer, but this really is broader than just the game, than the World Cup, and it's broader than the Olympics, which will be in LA in 2028. And I hope that U.S. soccer applies to host the Women's World Cup in 2027. This binational, multinational travel cooperation on the North American continent are going to be very important for our communities.
So we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, I want to switch gears from soccer, which is fabulous, and talk a little bit about legislation and policy. So we'll be right back.
Are you red, white, and blue, or just red and white? Beaver or bald eagle? Ryan Reynolds or J-Lo? Canusa Street, a masterclass in cross-border relations. This is where Canada and the United States intersect on the policies and issues of our two great nations. But you know that already. That's why you're here. The question is, if you want more of this bilateral bonanza delivered directly to your inbox, and you know you do,
How about signing up for Scotty Greenwood's weekly email updates on Canada-US relations? Head to cabc.co to sign up today. And now back to Canusa Street.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday unveiled plans to spread some $42 billion across the nation's 50 states and territories to create universal access to high-speed broadband internet in the next 7 years.
People strenuously opposed voting against it when we had this going on. This was going to bankrupt America.
So, Congressman, you're the ranking member on House Transportation Infrastructure. The White House seems this week to be rolling out a whole lot of promote infrastructure, the idea being the president maybe doesn't get enough credit for all of the work that you in Congress and his administration have done to invest in infrastructure. Talk to us, if you would, a little bit about that, because the polling is showing the American people like the projects, but maybe the political credit doesn't follow. How do you think about these things?
Well, I think individual members need to keep talking about the projects in their district and taking advantage of these announcements that are coming out, recent announcements on broadband deployment, and recent announcements on transit, especially low and no emission transit, investing in that cleaner infrastructure, pulling those diesel emitting transit buses off the road and replacing them with low or no emission buses. So I think whether the president's getting credit for it, members on the ground can get credit for it, and that credit can flow up. But, there's a reason why, I would argue, there's a reason why unemployment rate continues to be low. There's a reason why predictions of recession continue to fall flat. And part of that is the continued investment of these dollars from the bipartisan infrastructure law over not just the last year and a half, but over the next 4 years, continue to provide employment opportunities for women and men in all sorts of areas. We're going to build the new roads, build the new bridges. The broadband deployment is going to be incredible in a very deep supply chain. Craziest, you do this job and you think, I passed this law. I know people are going to go to work. I just don't know who they are. I went to the American Equipment Distributors Conference and spoke to them. These are folks who build the tractors and the bulldozers. Yeah. Well, the folks, the Ditch Witch folks in Oklahoma, Ditch Witch is headquartered in Oklahoma. They're very excited about broadband because you need to dig ditches to put broadband fiber in the ground. It occurred to me until I talked to them, just how much they're excited about what that's going to mean for their part of the business, building new Ditch Witch equipment in order to help with broadband deployment. The point I want to get to here, Scotty, is that members really need to tie, right down to the ground, literally and figuratively, right down to the ground, what these dollars are going to mean at home. It's harder when you're the president because you're the president of the whole country. It's easier when you're the member representing the 2nd Congressional District, because I'll be in Point Roberts on Friday to talk about broadband.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a good point. And just to your point about the equipment distributors, the equipment manufacturers are part of my organization. So I'm glad you did a shout out to the big equipment. And, it's not just digging the ditches for the broadband, but it's also, there are autonomous, tractors and these giant pieces of farm equipment that can be autonomous, maybe, but it doesn't work. I saw a demonstration of this in Montana, I think. Chris, maybe you were there too, a couple years ago. It can't work if you don't have the connectivity and the signal to send these robots around. So broadband is a key to many facets of life. And I think you make a good point about individual members touting the benefits.
And I would know, just to bring it sort of the issues we're talking about here, part of the bipartisan infrastructure law included a multi-million-dollar investment in land ports of entry. And so in my district alone, the Blaine commercial crossing at the Guide Meridian, the port of entry in Linden, the port of entry in Sumas are all slated to get major investment upgrades in order to those will largely focus on the commercial traffic coming into the U.S. and back again into Canada. The I-5 crossing there, of course, is where most of the passenger traffic goes. But BIL is a critical part of the investment in cross-border facilitation of trade.
Well, I wanted to follow up a little bit on that. I think of your district, my time there, as really being kind of a transportation hub. You've got the beautiful port of Seattle-Tacoma, which I know is south of your district. You've got PACCAR that does truck manufacturing. You've got Boeing, obviously, aviation. I know there's been, when you talk about Point Roberts, for a while during COVID, we were getting back and forth just on a ferry. The Washington State ferry system, was a connector for that community. How do we approach the border with a vision of connectivity and getting people to where they're going, rather than to what I think after 9/11 just became a kind of fortification of the border from another century, And COVID made that tough, and that was a different sort of case, but still, we seem to be more about building fences and less about building connections.
I would say COVID was unique. I get a lot of complaints from people in Bellingham and town at the border from Point Roberts, basically saying, Rick, you have to go tell the Canadians this. Tell them X, Y, Z. And I say, I'd say I won't. It's a different country. They have a different experience in COVID. The COVID rates lagged far behind the U.S. There's no interest from Canada in opening up the border because of people living on the border, because the COVID rates were lower, which I fully understand. So I think part of this is trying to get folks to understand there are two different countries we're talking about. If we start there, we can actually do almost anything. It's sometimes the attitude is that Vancouver's there for us, and Vancouver's view is like, well, not so fast. But I would also note during one of the first guys I hired in 2001 was a guy named Andy Anderson, bless his soul. He served with Al Swift as well, who's a predecessor of mine. And Andy would always say, number one lesson about the border, Rick, he goes, you will never solve the issues at the U.S.-Canada border. You can only manage them. Will you manage them well, or will you manage them poorly? And that's a very realistic view, I think, of managing issues between two countries, because it is still two countries. We are still two countries. There are ways we can cooperate. We cooperate much better on law enforcement with Canada, between Canada and the U.S. than between U.S. and Mexico, as a for instance. I'm basically writing laws about protecting our marine mammals, copying what Transport Canada and Canadian Coast Guard and others are doing north of, in the Haro Strait. Basically just stealing their ideas and putting them into U.S. law so we can harmonize our activities, our joint activities. So there are ways to cooperate, but there are different rules on transport of weapons between U.S. and Canada, and that's an issue for law enforcement. But Canada has a sovereign right to make their decisions about weapon transport, even legalized weapon transport for law enforcement officers. So it's just things we have to manage well, and sometimes we have to manage them better than we have been.
Well, and one last bit of nostalgia from my time out there. I remember sitting down with DHS. Talking about moving students back and forth across the border, for school trips kind of study. I do Canadian studies. And one of the things they were saying to us is, you talk about Canada and the U.S., well, there's the federal and there's the local. And the federal government says marijuana is a Schedule I narcotic. It is legal in Washington State. It's legal in B.C. And their big concern was that young people would forget that it was a big issue at the border where the federal law applied. So, there are a lot of players here. The border can be quite tough to manage, and giving people straight information about how it works. I'm just so glad that you're out there being a bit of an evangelist or explainer on how the border works.
Well, it's a great district to represent. I was born and raised here. My family on my dad's side has been here about 150 years. It's a privilege every day to represent it, so I want to do it well.
So we're coming to the end of our time here, and I'm really grateful for the conversation. Congressman, I want to ask you, because you have been in Congress now for a while, you've seen a lot. You've seen all kinds of different administrations and speakers and all of that. And you've experienced some things you might have never imagined, like January 6th. I wonder how you feel about the state of our democracy. How are you feeling as a United States, a member of the House of Representatives? How is our representative democracy doing? How do you feel about it?
I feel pretty good about it. The resilience of our our democratic institutions, with a small d, democratic institutions, really depend upon the resilience and the patience of the voters, the people who participate. And when you look at what the voters are doing and how they discern issues, I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm always surprised about how generally collectively the sophisticated voters are. They kind of see through the crud a lot of times. But that doesn't mean we can't be vigilant. We just saw the U.S. Supreme Court make a decision on voting rights. So you just never know. You mentioned January 6th, and not to dig too much into that, but for your Canadian listeners, you should know that the number of people who have been convicted as a result of actions on January 6, 2021 is in the multiple hundred. People serving, multi-month, multi-year federal prison terms. And so I don't say that to brag or gloat or anything, but I'm just saying that there are mechanisms within our democracy in order to enforce democracy and enforce that freedom is kind of a weird thing to say. It's an ironic thing to say, if you will. But to ensure that can vote, do get to vote, that our institutions are protected, those systems get us stretching every once in a while. We've seen that over the last 5 years. It's really getting stretched, but it's pretty resilient as well. And I find that I would say as well, I was talking to some folks the other day about this, what you see on television about the U.S. Congress and the people you talk to, that's, if everyone just stopped and counted the actual number of people you see speaking about and things, it could be in the 30s. Right. And there's 435 of us. Most of us are not on cable news. Most of us are actually doing the other work, the work of Congress. So just I would throw that. I'm also a bit Pollyannish about it, but I love the United States of America and I love our democracy. So I'm going to be always optimistic about it.
Most congressmen do not appear on Canusa Street, but you will always be welcome back.
Tell them all they got to get on Canusa Street.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
We're working our way through. It's going to take us a couple hundred years, but we're so happy you joined us, Congressman. It's always good to see you and talk to you, and we're appreciative of your service to our country and to the state of Washington. And this has been a great chat. And we're all going to cheer for the women's national team now that you've flagged it for everybody. So good job.
Very excited. I'm very excited about. I don't know what time I have to be up because it's in New Zealand and it's not my current time zone.
Might be easier just to fly over right now.
I'll just do that.
And Congressman, I learned something from you. You and I have this in common. I was a ball boy for the Detroit Express back in the NASL. People don't remember them, but they were good in their day.
I thought it was a tennis thing, being a ball boy or a ball girl. I didn't realize soccer had it too. Tells you how much I don't know. What I don't know about soccer could fill an encyclopedia, as they say.
I don't know about that. But anyway, thank you so much for coming, Congressman.
I mean, Chris, we've got a super fan of sports. We've got a super fan of democracy. I love that conversation with Rick Larsen. What a cool guy.
Well, and a super fan of infrastructure and being sensible about managing the border as an equal partner with the Canadians. We don't see that all the time either. And with all the frustration around his cool head and his desire to promote cooperation and get around some of the bureaucratic headaches that we have, inevitably, two different systems, I think is a real breath of fresh air.
I think so, too. The thing that cracked me up was when he said his constituents will say to him, go yell at Canada about whatever. And he's like, nope, I'm not going to yell at Canada. I thought, well, we yell at Canada. Every other member of Congress yells at Canada, and they yell at us. That's one of the benefits of being right across the street from each other, is we can just holler to each other. Anyway.
Yes, Canusa Street can be a noisy street sometimes.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, great to see you as always, my friend.
Always a pleasure, and we'll see you next time on Canusa Street.
This podcast is brought to you by the Canadian American Business Council and the Wilson Center. If you like this episode, help others find our show and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.